Hey 302, I'm Jackie Ferris. On this week's show, we're going to take a deep dive into the history of recorded music. We are at the Johnson Victrola Museum in Dover, and we're going to learn a little bit about the difference between a Victor and a Victrola and the Clovis of his day, that dog Nipper. Get ready to take a spin. The 302 is dropping the needle. Hey 302, when you hear the term Victrola, it summons an image of a fox terrier peering into a horn. But there's so much more to this turn-of-the-century marvel. We are here at the Johnson Victrola Museum, and I'm joined by Chris Hall. He is the supervisor of the museum. Chris, thank you so much for joining us.
I'm happy to be here.
Now, we hear Victor, Victrola, but this all started with the Victor Talking Machine Company,
Yes.
right?
Yeah. So the Victor Talking Machine Company operated from 1901 until 1929 in Camden, New Jersey, but it was actually started by a Delaware man named Eldridge Reeves Johnson, who was born outside of Wilmington and raised in the Dover area until he was about a teenager when he moved on and became an apprentice at a machine shop in Philly, before then moving out to Camden.
Now, he started working on another machine for a gentleman by the name of Berliner, is that right?
Yes, so Emil Berliner had invented a machine called the gramophone, which was a flat disc playing machine, which was revolutionary for the time. Everyone else was using cylinders that are kind of reminiscent of like a Campbell's soup can that would have your recording on there. Berliner designs this machine with a flat record, and while his competitors, mainly Columbia and Edison and his phonograph company, had figured out how to automate machines with spring motors, he couldn't find a way to do it with his. He had heavy metallic turntables that just seemed to weigh the motor down, but he heard that Johnson's machine shop in Camden, which had been automating sewing machines, was capable of working with spring motors, so he had a man named Bedford G. Royal come and see what Johnson could do with it. And Johnson was able to build a whole new machine operation to get the machine to work correctly.
Now, as history progressed, the Victor Talking Machine Company was created, and they were a little innovative. Talk to me a little bit about the Victor, which is, and also tell us the difference between a Victor and a Victrola.
Okay, so a Victor is, and we have a number of them throughout this machine, it is the turntable on a box with the horn on top. That is the Victor Talking Machine, Victor Talking Machine, often just called Victors. The Victrola is kind of if you took it and then flipped it upside down and then put it all in a cabinet. So rather than having the big brass horn on top like the talking machine did, the Victrola actually had the horn built internally behind a set of closed doors. And that was a major innovation for Victor, because from the 1870s with the invention of the phonograph until 1906 with the Victrola, you had no volume control on any of these machines. So if you needed to quiet down, you had to find some way of basically plugging up the horn, which often included taking your own clothing, we like to say socks, and stuffing them in there to mute it. The Victrola gave you the option to close the doors, close the lid, and have a wider range of control over what you were listening to.
Now, when it comes to purchasing a machine like this, a Victor talking machine with the horn on the top, those were not cheap.
Oh, they were not. I can't give you a price off the top of my head for them, but they started between $25 to $75 depending on how nice of a model you wanted. Some of the earlier ones that Victor started with were actually only about 12 to 15. The idea was, with Victor being a newer company, they kind of wanted to keep it simplistic, but as they kind of grew as a company, the machines became pretty expensive. And you have to remember, this is a time where people made between $200 and $400 a year. So some of these could cost as much as about a quarter of what you made for the entire year.
When we talk about the original label, the Fox Terrier
Yes.
is on the original label. Tell me a little bit about how that whole image came together.
So that image was actually a painting done by a British painter named Francis Barrade. He had we believe an Edison phonograph originally, and a mixed terrier dog named Nipper, who had belonged to his brother. And he noticed that when he played this machine, Nipper kept looking at the horn with the same puzzled expression, and he thought it would make a nice painting. Because of the cylinder machine that was originally in there, he tried to sell it to the Edison Phonograph Company in England, but they weren't interested. Some of his friends recommended that he use a Berliner gramophone instead, as they said it was more visually appealing. So he went to the gramophone office in England asking to borrow the machine. They wanted to know why, of course, because you normally don't go in there asking to borrow a machine that costs money. And when he explained it to them and showed them the painting, they basically bought the rights to it on the spot with the provision that he changed the machine. Now, Gramophone and Victor had a partnership. Johnson was still making their motors until they were shut down in the United States. So kind of a friendly peace existed between the two. They had hashed out a deal around 1904 so that Johnson could use it on Victor products wherever they were sold, and Gramophone would use that same trademark wherever their products were sold. So you had one trademark kind of split between two companies who just agreed not to sell in each other's territories.
Now you mentioned the artist, and I know you have an exhibit upstairs that we're going to talk about a little later in the show. But when it comes to the move from the Victor to the Victrola is really where the bulk of the history is with Mr. Johnson, right?
Yes. So the Victrola kind of becomes their big selling machine. Now it took a couple years to catch on. So you asked about cost. The first Victrola to be released in 1906 cost $200. It was one of the full cabinet machines. We're actually fortunate enough to have one of those in this museum. It was definitely out of most people's price ranges, so it took about 3 to 4 years for them to come out with the smaller tabletops, which again, we have plenty of those in here. Those were much more affordable, being only a little bit more than the talking machine was, and that's kind of where the big boom came, where people wanted to have these. And also it helped that Victor introduced financing. So if you couldn't come in and just drop the full price at once, you could pay it off over time, so you could own what had become a real status symbol. This was your way of kind of buying a luxurious thing. You would be the talk of your town. So allowing more people access to that through financing allowed, of course, a wider range. And when your neighbor has it and everyone wants to go to their house, of course, it inspires you to want one as well. So it was a kind of a booming thing of this was an invention that didn't, do work for you, didn't clean your house, but it kind of made you more popular than anything else at the time would.
Now we talked about innovations and everything and all of the different numbers of Victrolas that you have. We're going to take a look at those when we come right back.
I'm Carol, and I love the 302.
Welcome back. We're at the Johnson Victrola Museum, and we are now in what is a mock-up of what a showroom would look like.
Yeah, so this is basically set up to look like a 1920s storeroom, a Victor dealership, or even just because we do have a product from another company, any record store that you would have gone into in the 1920s would pretty much look pretty similar to this.
Well, let's talk about how it started. Now you have a cylinder, and
yes.
This is what?
So this is a cylinder record, I believe, possibly made by Edison. But we have a number of these in here, yeah.
And that's how it started, but then it progressed to the flat record and the Victrola, or the Victor.
Yes. So we go from this here to, I'm not sure if we actually have a gramophone on display. Unfortunately, we don't. But basically, the records similar to this that were made with gramophone by Emil Berliner. And then Victor, of course, gets into this as well, making their own records, which you see are all behind me here, wrapping all the way around this room, and we even have more in an office as well.
Talk to me a little bit about just the genius of Johnson and his ability to get what could have been the first celebrity endorsements.
So most companies prior to Victor didn't really get mainline singers. For the most part, artists themselves did not want to make recordings. There was this fear that if you could buy their recording and listen to it at home, you would never come and see them live, which of course we know happens with every technological change. Victor went out and really pushed a opera singer named Enrico Caruso, who was probably the most famous opera tenor of the time, to sign a very limited contract with Victor. They would pay him a certain amount of money to record 10 songs, which he basically did all in one day. He got a good amount of money, and Victor had the first famous artists of the time exclusively contracted to them. So if you wanted the chance to hear Caruso and you didn't have a way of going to see him live, you can now listen to him in your home. And when Caruso did it, he added such an element of legitimacy to recording that artists were basically just willing to sign with anyone. In some cases, there's a belief that if you were using fake names so that they could record with multiple companies to get around contract law at the time. But it took this idea of recorded sound as a novelty or a thing for basically just some wealthy people to show off to their friends, something you would see at an exhibition, and turned it into what we have now of basically music on demand. So that was Victor and Caruso right there.
Excellent. So I guess MP3 has a lot of gratitude for the original. Now let's talk about the machines that we have in front of us.
Yes. So I do have a Victor talking machine here. This was one of the Monarchs, called that because it was supposed to be one of the higher end talking machines. And then I'm basically surrounded here by different types of Victrolas. So what makes a Victrola is that you have the horn inside right behind those doors, and most of them would also have lids to cover up the turntable as well. So you could actually enclose it, and a lot of times people also liked them because it was more like having a nice piece of furniture than a talking machine. In fact, the guy who came up with the Victrola was Johnson's best friend and vice president, Leon Douglas, who had gone around talking to a lot of female consumers who did not like what they were calling scientific instruments in their home and wanted a nicer piece of furniture. He drew up a design, gave it to Johnson, said take it or leave it. Johnson loved it, and then basically Victor becomes a Victrola company. In fact, by 1920, they stopped producing talking machines altogether.
So when you look at these, I mean, it is like a piece of furniture, although they never actually manufactured furniture.
No,
it was just cabinets for their Victrolas,
yes.
Right?
In fact, Victor went out to find the greatest cabinet makers in the world to make sure that not only did you have the best machinery, the best recordings, but you also had the most attractive cabinet in your home.
So you hear a lot about, the things that Johnson did in order to keep the company going for so many years. Talk to me a little bit about his business acumen and how long the company survived.
So Victor survives for 28 years. Johnson actually retires only 2 years before the company's acquired by RCA, a later partner, and of course, probably the biggest radio company at the time then. One of the things that they really did was advertising. So most companies at the time avoided it. There was this very odd idea that advertising was seen as desperation, so having to tell people about your product means you weren't making a good product. Douglas again kind of comes in and tells Johnson, hey, spend money on ads, tell people about this, and more importantly, tell them it's like the greatest thing they could ever own. Victor pours a lot of money into advertising. They advertise in just about every medium they could. We even have in our full collection, not on site, card cards, which were basically the taxi cab things. They would put Victor ads in those as well to tell as many people as possible how amazing their product was. And those ads generated a lot of revenue because basically everybody knew. There's a reason why Victrola becomes a recognizable product name for things that aren't even Victrolas, like Band-Aids and bandages. Victrola is just synonymous with this whole era. And another thing that Victor really pushed was finding new genres. So they get started like everybody primarily with opera. You have popular music, you get some Broadway. One of the big risks that they took in 1917 was putting out jazz recordings. So their biggest competitor, Columbia, had a band called the Original Dixieland Jazz Band, had made recordings, and then kind of just didn't feel comfortable releasing what they thought could be controversial. Victor signed them as soon as Columbia dropped them, and in 1917, Victor starts putting out a catalog of jazz music. So kind of being able to evolve with popular tastes at the time and staying relevant.
It sounds like he was very successful at that, and we're going to talk a little bit more about the Victrola when we come back.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Duffy, and I'm so excited to be back on the 302 with all the best exhibitions in the Delaware area.
Welcome back. We are now on the second floor of the Johnson Victrola Museum. I'm joined by Chris Hall. Now, Chris, this is a very special area. This is the Dr. Linwood Hydges Gallery. Did I say that right?
You did, yes. So Linwood Hydges owned, with a few exceptions, all the machines in this room. He was a private collector who actually had 2 houses worth of machines, collectibles, memorabilia, and he donated it to the state of Delaware about 2 years before we were able to open our second floor back in 2001.
Now let's talk about the different kinds of pieces that you've taken from the collection, which of course this is just a sampling of his collection. I see that there are some really beautiful cabinets spaced throughout the room. Kind of talk to us a little bit about, why each piece was chosen.
Mostly to highlight the wide range of what Hygis had collected, while also highlighting the kind of variety that Victor offered. So behind me here is a collection of the same model of Victrola, the Victrola 16, but you could buy it in a variety of woods, wood stains, and there's even one back there where you could have it painted with gold paint and decorated with specific art that you wanted. On the other side of me here, you have a number of machines who have been painted in detail to specifications. Victor believed in really giving customers what they wanted and giving them that product that they really wanted, which really separated them from others at the time. Of course, Ford's famous for you can have any color you want but black. Victor's over here giving you whatever wood you wanted to match what you already had in your home. Because for the most part, you're talking about people who had furniture that they had inherited, and they wanted their machines to match that to, of course, have a more elegant furniture piece that they would have.
So when you're talking about the level of customization that he had, is that part of the reason why he was so successful? Because there were so many other companies out there who manufactured talking machines.
Absolutely. So one of the things that really makes Victor stand out is listening to their customers. Now, of course, they didn't go on every complaint customers would have, but really taking consideration of what consumers were interested in, what they were complaining about, what they assumed people would want in their homes. That factors in a lot into what Victor's doing. Whereas a number of the competitors at the time, mostly because they had come from backgrounds of being more inventors of this is my genius on display, Victor was run as a company that sold record players and recorded music. So you had to make sure that the audience wanted what you were selling.
So you have so many different examples of the advance of gramophones, of talking machines. How did this collection all come together? Did it start with Mr. Hygis, or was there already a Victrola museum in place?
So we were established in 1967 as an agreement between Fenimore Johnson, Eldridge Reeves Johnson's son, and Delaware State Museums, which is now Historical and Cultural Affairs, who I work for. So the first floor here was actually, the first floor was open and has been since '67. The second floor, though, was actually used as offices. They were looking for something to expand with. At the same time, they had I believe a volunteer who was working here who knew Hygis and knew he was interested in finding someone to take his collection. So when they acquired it, they were like, hey, we can open up the second floor. We can build this large, lovely gallery that we have now. So the two things just kind of worked together. They wanted to expand more of the museum, and they happened to come upon a very large collection to utilize.
I know you guys are always looking at new ways to bring folks in with new programs and things like that. One of the things that I wasn't aware of in my research is all of the advertisements that you have. Really amazing for back in the day.
Oh yeah. So we have a number of ads throughout display on both floors. Advertising is something that we've been looking at expanding in our interpretation because it played such a vital role. And the advertising was pretty bold at the time. So traditionally you would have basically product write-ups. Maybe you'd have a black and white image of what they were selling, but generally you didn't. You might have a generic image more than anything else. Victor put out full color ads. They would rent out space on the back of the Saturday Evening Post, and that back cover would be their full color ad from top to bottom. We have an image downstairs that's blown up on the wall, and that was a double-page spread in a newspaper. They wanted people to know, and they really wanted to get people's attention by having as much color and taking up as much space as they could.
Speaking of color, let's talk a little bit about the corner here. You
Yes.
talk about the portrait itself of Nipper, the image everyone thinks of when they think of Victor or Victrola.
So this is actually a new display that we just had installed last week. Our collections team did an amazing job assembling this. Traditionally, we had for a number of years just a display of a lot of Nipper memorabilia, and what we wanted to talk about more was who Francis Barraud, the painter, was. The man behind the image that everyone knows, who sadly may not be as remembered as he should be. To some degree, yes, he was a painter who just lucked out one day that he walked in and asked the right question, but we wanted to recreate an artist's studio, kind of a representation of what he would be working with, because you can even see that he was an ordinary man with ordinary means. He wasn't a famous painter. He wasn't someone who was already famous. He was one man who thought this would make a clever little image and who ended up kind of changing the world of branding in the 20th century.
Sure, and it's also very iconic, and I know you have a lot of other memorabilia. Talk to me about the Nipper memorabilia.
So Nipper memorabilia is probably one of the first times that a logo takes off or a brand takes off the way it does, because it wasn't just on their products. I mean, we have a number of things here. We have even more in our full collection. If you could basically reproduce the image of Nipper, of his master's voice on something, there was going to be a way to do it. From the earliest days of just, being able to buy a print to it, to even through, I think, the 90s, when Nipper was still being used by RCA at the time, they were manufacturing that image in as many ways. And there are collectors who come in here who just want to see more Nipper memorabilia. They are Nipper collectors themselves. It's probably still one of the most famous trademarks in the world.
So before we go, let's talk a little bit about your hours and how people can come and see all of the amazing things you have here.
So we're open Wednesday through Saturday. Because we are in our COVID operations, we have times available, specific times Wednesday through Saturday. Best way to reach us is to call our phone number, which they can find either on our website or on our Facebook page. Reserve a tour. You'll get a chance to actually see both floors now that we've got our second floor reopened, and have a chance to come through here and see what we have to offer and hear the story that we tell.
It's an amazing slice of history. Chris, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for coming. We loved having you.
We'll be right back. That'll do it for this episode of The 302. We leave you now with a sample of the best things in life are free. Until next time, I'm Jackie Ferris. We'll see you on The 302. You ready to go out? Let's go.